It's time for another episode of the Shaun Tabatt Show, a podcast where I connect you with thought leaders from across the globe, dig into some of my favorite topics like personal development, marketing, spirituality, and pretty much any other shiny object that happens to catch my attention. Today, my special guest is my friend JerriAnn Webb, and we're going to be talking about her brand new book, Heaven in My Home, Building a Supernatural Family Culture. JerriAnn, it is always a joy to speak with you. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Shaun. It's always fun speaking with you. I love you. I love your family. It's so good to be on.
Yes, it's wonderful to connect with you. It's been way too long, so good to see you
Yeah.
this morning. Let's kick this off probably the same place we did last time, and that's with a bit of the JerriAnn Webb origin story. Whether you want to tell us about your background, how this message started to get birthed in your life, you get to decide because it's your origin story. So whatever you feel we need to know for a little bit of context before we get into the meat of the book, share that with us now.
Okay, let's go straight for the book, the origin story of the book. And as you know, Troy wrote the foreword to it, and it's probably about 10 pages. It's a chapter all in itself. But one of the things he said really sums up the heart of the book. And he talked about in the foreword how he was, when he met me the first time, I was preaching about family. And he said that after that moment, he believed he could carry heaven home with him in places he didn't even think were possible before. And I thought, wow, that's the heart of the book. That there is such hope for your home and your family. And I think a lot of times in Christian circles, we are so used to, so good at believing for healing or a breakthrough with finances. And those are good things. Those are God things. But I think often I've seen in regards to family, we say, it is what it is. Or there's no hope with, man, my children are going to know the Lord, or my marriage is going to be restored, or I'm going to fight for my legacy. And I've just seen so often that dismissed for whatever reason, it just is being dismissed. And so I wrote the book to bring hope, like an infusion of hope to family.
That's good. That's good.
Yeah.
Well, I think one of the challenges we really face is it can be very easy to think we can just outsource everything. I can send my kids to school. They can go to youth group, they can go to Sunday school, and things that you would have typically traditionally done more so in your home. I think we've just, and not that anybody's doing anything necessarily bad or wrong. Those aren't necessarily bad things, but it can be really easy to be super busy with work and life and ministry and everything that's going on, and lose that sense of just being intentional that in addition maybe to the other people that are pouring into your kids and pouring into your family, you have a responsibility to do that yourself in your home as you're going about doing all the things. And so what I love about your book is it's a wake-up call, and it's a reminder that as moms and dads, there's a real intentionality for us to step back into if we've kind of lost the plot with that.
And that is possible, that you can do this. I think sometimes it seems daunting, or I don't even know where to begin. But that's what the book is about, that you can do this, that it's necessary for what God is doing in the earth, on the earth today. And it's so on God's heart. And I think often, although this is a strong statement, but we've done church at the expense of our families. And I think he's calling the bride back into health. He's calling us back into that who I am on a stage is who I am in my home. That there is a remnant of healthy families rising up, because really that's attractive. When people see a family that's healthy, that's living fully alive, man, there's nothing like it. The whole world turns and says, man, what is that? I want that, because we're all longing for family.
Well, I think what you identify there is really key. Who I am on the stage is who I am at home. I think one of the biggest disservices that leaders and pastors do to the church is when they portray one thing on the stage, but that's not who they are in their private life and their family or behind the scenes. And when there's scandal or failure or people fall, so to speak, it really hurts the average person in the pew, in the sense like, well, man, if the super mega Christian on the stage can't keep his marriage going, can't minister to his kids and all those things, what hope do I have as just this little less spiritual peon? I mean, we put people on a pedestal to our own detriment, but when leaders aren't actually that kind of transparent person and all the spheres that they have influence, I feel like they're almost setting themselves up for the enemy to come in and do that exact scenario. And
Mhm.
it really is detrimental to the people that they serve, the people that follow them.
It is. And so, really, more than parenting or anything like that, the book is about heart transformation. It's really about knowing who you are, because if we don't solve the identity crisis, everything else is going to be a crisis. So, if we don't confront the things that we need to confront, heal emotionally, spiritually, mentally, if we don't heal first in ourselves and our homes, then everything else is going to be in crisis.
You caught me while I was trying to type a note of something to not forget. I'll go there just because since you redirected me. Just the sense of you mentioned identity crisis. I think that is what is the biggest challenge in culture
Mm,
today, where
sure.
people have been told not only
Yeah.
does your family suck, but Christianity's bad, your country, your country's bad and evil. Pretty much everything that would give us moorings, belonging, an understanding of who we are. I always say a story that we're writing. We really write ourselves into stories to have a successful life, to know where we've been, who we are, where we're going. And by and large, for most people, even on an individual basis, it's hard to figure out
Mhm.
to live, let alone trying to raise up little people to be successful. If you don't know
Yeah.
any of those things, you can't give that to that next generation that's coming up
Yes.
after you. I mean, people just feel so lost.
Yes, yes, yes. And so I would say to that, for anyone watching, God was not confused when he made you. We may be confused, the world is confused, but God was not confused. And I think the whole book centers around, can we trade out our own limited thinking of family for God's way of doing things, for God's design? And so it speaks of his design, his purposes, and then everything else flows from that place of knowing who you are, of knowing what you're called to do, and then modeling that for your family, not just for your children, but for your extended family. And then that extends to community, that extends to regions. So I don't, does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that definitely makes sense. And Troy would be proud of us. This is going to be the most ADD squirrel interview of the week, with everything, all the
No,
chaos that's going
Shaun,
on around me in my house and everything else. We're gonna bounce around a lot, and that's fine. I'd love to have you speak, JerriAnn, to just the difference. We're backtracking over to a question I would have normally asked earlier. Um, in terms of the writing process, you have a couple of children's books, and then this is your first like trade nonfiction major writing project. I'd love to hear for you, just process wise, creative wise, what was different? It's one thing to write a children's book; you got to have illustrations, and that's one road. But doing this project, kind of a different monster. So, how was it different? What did you learn in the process? How did it stretch you? I always like to hear a little bit about that, because each writing journey, you're getting a sense and a flavor of the
yeah,
season the author's in, but God's
yes,
also transforming and doing
yes.
something as you're writing the message as well.
Absolutely. I think for me, the children's books is so neat to me how nothing is wasted with God. And as a teenager, I was writing poetry and ballads and all of these things that I just did in English class and loved. My undergrad is in English. And I thought that I just, after that season, I put it to the side. But as my children, they were little, and I was wanting to teach them how to walk in everything they have access to through Jesus. How do I simplify that? How do I model that and then teach them that? And so that's when I sat down and I wrote out the kingdom. And it really just came, just empowered by the Holy Spirit. What do they need to know? And, and I wrote down, how do you live as solution? Just in an easy way for kids. So that came just very easy for me. It's whimsical, it's a fun read. And then I wrote The King and You, which is the story of King David. And I wanted the kids to know that he was always a king, that there was an identity within him long before he ruled anything or did anything great, that was who he was. And so I think I like to think I put deep spiritual truths embedded within a whimsical, a fun children's story. One of the statements I make was people of purpose will always surpass people of talent. That goes back to when you know who you are, when you know who you're called to do, nobody can take that from you. And so I think it was just a natural progression, since I am a storyteller, to begin to write down the stories in our home. And I told Troy this, I thought at first, I thought that it was very normal what Matt and I do, how we live, how we model it. And then we realized, no, it's not normal. Not every home does this. Not every home knows how to do this. Not every home knows how to live fully surrendered and yielded to Holy Spirit. Not every family knows how to encounter God in their living room, because I think we're taught to, well, you encounter God in church, you encounter God in a service. And so I wanted to flip that and say, hey, wait, you can encounter the Holy Spirit, the manifest presence of God in your living room. You can be fully filled with the Holy Spirit and led in every day, because John 3:34 says we don't have the Spirit without measure. And so we began to write down all the stories, all the lessons learned, all the failures, all the funny mistakes. I'm very transparent in the book. And so to answer your question, it just seemed like just a natural progression at where I was at and what Holy Spirit was teaching me.
Well, I think one of the easier things about writing adult nonfiction as compared to kids' books is kids' books are an interesting challenge because, on the one hand, you're writing for children, but you're also writing to the adults that are going to read those books, often to the children. You have a sales challenge of children are not going to buy the books, adults are going to buy the books. So it's a very, when you have to think of all the marketing and sales elements for a children's book, completely different than a nonfiction book. If traditional adult nonfiction, the audience you're writing to, and so it's a bit simpler, and you don't even need illustrations most of the time. So hey, you get that to the finish line a little
Shaun,
bit faster.
I didn't think about any of that. That's your mind. I just said, okay, go, I'll do it. But those are so good. I need to think about those things.
That's right. Yes, it's my practical publishing brain trying to solve these problems. I guess the place I'd like to go next, JerriAnn, is just talk about like what you had mentioned. Like you and Matt realized, wow, our home is different. Like not everybody does the things that we do. But kind of in that same way that we suggested earlier, that if you're having an identity crisis, you can't figure out how to give away what you have to your kids. How does that start with you and Matt? Like how do you have to press in and be filled up and be spending time with the Lord yourselves individually and as a couple to empower you to do what you want to do in your home and with your family? Because again, any amount of time we're sowing into our kids, pouring into your kids, awesome. But if we're an empty vessel and as a couple, we're an empty vessel, we have very little to give away of significance. Right. What does that look like for you?
Goodness, that's a whole other origin story that I write about, because when we first got married, Matt was an alcoholic. And I wrote in the book, I had more emotional problems than his, the alcoholism. And I write about how we knew going in that marriage would be hard. We had that mindset that this is going to be work, and that we were willing to do the hard work and to heal together. He knew that alcohol was a problem. I knew I needed to heal from some things. So we began to do that together, to heal, to confront, to talk about the hard things that everybody pushes aside. And so by the time we had children, now, nobody tells us how hard it is to have kids. Everybody's like, it's wonderful. They're such a blessing. If they spill things, that's okay. And all those things are true. but man, it was hard. And so now it was a whole other dying to yourself and allowing Holy Spirit to lead and yield to the Holy Spirit. And I think we were just willing to do that because we knew, man, I don't want to live a life of just emotional dysfunction. I want to be whole and well. And I know that it's not just for me right now, it's for my children's children and their children's children. And so I wanted to be well and to be whole. And so we always went after those things that would disrupt destiny or identity. And God was so gracious and kind to us and sending us people and mentors, but we were willing to do that. And we were willing to die to ourselves and surrender and put everything on the table for God to mess with anything that needed to be messed with. Yeah. Did that make sense, Shaun?
Yes, that's a bold invitation to give God. Generation. I think having a generational mindset is something that I think got kind of lost for a while. I saw that talked about a ton in like hyper conservative homeschooling movements, and then you had some major organizations that kind of were leading that charge implode. And now I'm seeing the call for like a real generational mindset reemerge in the charismatic church. Like I've encountered quite a few authors in the past 3 to 5 years where God just put this in their heart, and they're all about family and legacy in a way that we hadn't necessarily seen in this church space. So,
Wow.
whether one side of the fence drops the baton, God tosses it over to the other side to pick it up, because apparently He's on mission by having us move in a generational mindset. What does it look like to? So you and Matt did a lot of work. You walked with God. You basically said, "We're going to yield. We'll yield. We'll yield. We'll yield." What does that look like when you start? Based on what you learned, how God changed you, what's it like when you start pouring into your kids and walking alongside your kids so they can really capture some of those things? And we often say things are caught and not taught. We can tell them stuff, but as they see us living things out, they pick up. Those are often the things they're going to talk to us about, not the things we tried to just like verbally teach them, so to speak.
Yes. So we're very aware of the culture of our home, and we are continually talking about what we want that culture to look like. So two big things for us are we want a culture of speaking life. So we are always speaking life over one another, over people we talk about. So the kids are never going to hear us talk in a negative way about somebody. They're never going to hear us call someone a name. It's always going to be life-giving. And that has changed everything. And so even when they talk, we don't call a name. We don't accuse, because then we partner with the accuser. So we're really honed in on how we speak, and we model that. And when we don't, they're quick to call it out because that culture has been established. Another culture that we wanted right from the bat was a culture of honor. And so we are honoring one another. They see Matt and I honor one another, even in disagreements. I think Matt and I, we can raise our voices a little bit, and they're like, "Hey, wait, what are y'all doing? Because your tone's changed." And we're teaching them, hey, honor is not always agreement. You can disagree and still have honor. And we're modeling what that looks like to them. And so it happens. And I talk about this too in the book. There's a whole chapter on routine. It really happens in the routine. And, I've talked to several people about quantity versus quality time. And man, I know a lot of stats would say you got to have that quality time. And yes, but quantity is important. It's important that they see us in the everyday, day after day after day, modeling honor at the breakfast table, at the dinner table, throughout, shopping at the grocery store, that we are modeling honor wherever we go.
Well, I'd like to press into, so that on the one hand, we live this out when it's just our families, but I'd love to hear a couple of stories about just memorable situations where you've had to live it out when you've had guests or people in your home, and live it out when you're just out and about at the store doing this or that or the other thing. So when other people are around, how does it look like to continue living these things out? Because it's easier when there's nobody else around. But there's a risk when we have to still do these things we have to choose to take when we bring other people into the situation.
Goodness, yes. That's where it's lived out most, really. So we want the kids to see that we are willing to be inconvenienced by people. And so that sounded bad, but I meant that we're willing to be so led by the Holy Spirit so that the Holy Spirit can disrupt our plans, and that we're open to that. Because if we're truly yielded, we're going to be open to that. So I remember when the kids were little, not so much anymore, but when they were very small, we'd go out to dinner or lunch or wherever at a restaurant. And if someone was sitting by themselves, they would always ask that person to sit with us, which is weird. I know it's weird, but it's a way to bless somebody and love on somebody, especially elderly people that would be eating in a restaurant alone. And it was just kind of our family thing. And so I remember we were building our home, and someone had cheated out us a bunch of money. It was just bad situation. And Matt was not happy. And we were on the way to dinner. And I was trying to keep the peace and make think this is great, guys. We're going to go to a family dinner, and it was just heavy. What had happened, how much money we lost, and just such a spirit of heaviness and disappointment and anger. Matt was really angry about that. And so I remember we went to eat dinner, and there was an elderly lady sitting at the table across from us. And we sat down, and the kids didn't miss a beat. They were like, "Hey, can we invite her to the table? Can she eat with us?" And I looked at Matt, and his face was like, "Okay, okay." Just weary from having to walk through that and having to walk through it with honor, not, yeah, that's so. He said, "Okay." And the lady actually took us up on the offer, and she came and sat with us. And the kids actually ended up crawling in her lap, and she was showing them pictures of her dogs. And we bought her dinner and blessed her, extravagantly blessed her, because that's what believers do. And so I remember when she sat down, that spirit of heaviness broke over us through the act of being inconvenienced by a stranger. And I think in that way, the kids held us accountable to that, because they knew they didn't see a daddy that was mad. They didn't know the backstory or what was even going on. They just knew the culture of our home was an invitation. They just knew the culture of our home was blessing. And so they're like, "Yeah, of course we're going to invite her to the table." And it changed everything.
I'd love to hear, JerriAnn, in terms of as your kids have gotten older. So you just described a situation where, like, oh, let's invite this grandma to sit at the table with us. Do you see other places where they actually are the ones trying to initiate you and Matt into these situations to minister or to step out? Do they identify these things more so than they would have, say, a few years ago?
All the time. All the time. I mean, they are all the time on go. "Hey, I feel like we need to do this," or "I feel like this." And yes. So we picked up a homeless lady that needed a place to stay, and so got her situated. She actually came to church with us, and I looked out across the room, and my daughter was just curled up in her lap, just just talking to her. And it was such a profound moment to me, because the lady needed touch. She needed just to hug her. She hugged me. It was exactly what she needed. And my daughter knew that. So yes, all the time, to answer your question, we're yes, being held accountable.
Well, and the great thing about children is they don't have all the same boundaries and baggage and just kind of history that we do, where we're like, oh, this is a messy situation. This is going to be difficult. I don't want to deal with that. And so
Mhm.
God bless our children for, again, not realizing or having the context to know why this could be a bad situation or not the best situation. They just see somebody that needs to be loved. They just see somebody that needs to encounter Jesus. And as you're describing, inviting you to step into that situation, and probably a little bit more willing to be inconvenienced, because they don't know what your schedule is necessarily for the day.
Sure. Yes. Yeah. And I think too, with them, teaching and modeling, hearing from the Holy Spirit and discerning, when do I go and when do I stop? When do I talk to someone? When do I not? And so even navigating that with them, like, they hear from the Holy Spirit. So asking them, "Okay, what's God telling you to do? What do you sense about that situation? What's Holy Spirit saying? Do we move on that?" So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that might be a good place to kind of land the interview in terms of um, being conscious of the fact that our kids, they have the same Holy Spirit that we do. It's not like some mini Holy Spirit that's with the kids.
Mhm.
What are some of the ways that you've seen the kids step out? I know you have stories of the kids praying for people and different
Yeah.
things, but we often will just be like, yeah, the kids get to go to Sunday school and this or that, but we don't necessarily invite them into or allow them to lead ministry situations. It's one thing to invite somebody to your table. It's a totally different thing. It's like, the kids want to pray for this person that has this medical condition or
Mhm.
whatever it might be. What are some of the ways that you've seen the kids get bolder, I guess, in terms of praying for people, ministering to people as this has progressed for your family?
Goodness, so they start off our Light Breaks Through events now with prayer. So they're on stage praying. There's a boldness that they're carrying. That's I don't know if they've always had it, but you can really see it now. And this was such a funny story to me because they're so playful. I mean, they're 11 and 9 now, but we were at an event, and I had a friend and her daughter, and my daughter was sitting beside her, and just to talking, just to playing. And there was an altar call going on and worship at one of our Light Breakthrough events. And my friend was telling me that all of a sudden, my daughter told her friend, wait 1 minute, I'll be right back. And she runs across the room to a lady who is sobbing, and she lays her hand on her, prays over her, prophesies over her, and then hugs her, and then runs right back and starts playing. And I love that story because there's just a playfulness in it that I can do what God's called me to do, and then I can go right back over here. And there was also the freedom that she knew she had to go do that and then come right back. Anyway, we have so many stories like that, but where I've just seen them not get permission, just know that they're called and they're sent for that moment, for that person, and then they'll go right back to what they're doing.
And in terms of, the reader's journey with the book, if you had one thing where like, okay, everybody who reads this is the way I want your life to be changed. This is the thing I want you to grasp. If you could ensure every person that touches this book gets that one thing, what is that?
Goodness, that you can live healthy, fully alive within a family. And that family is God's design, and that you can have a healthy family. And then, man, when that happens, goodness, it'll turn the world upside down. And then we'll see, mamas and daddies become spiritual mamas and daddies to communities. We'll see children laying hands on the sick in the grocery store because they know who they carry. We'll see kingdom business just begin to infiltrate the marketplace and cause revival. And so I feel like it starts in the family, and then it just will spread across our nation. And yeah, it just be incredible move of God.
And JerriAnn, for you on this side of writing this book, I always say when God calls us to write something, for better or worse, we become the poster boy, the poster girl for that message, whether we intended that or not. When people read our book, they expect that we live our life out the way that we describe in the book. Are there any ways you've seen God kind of test you or stretch you a little bit on the other side of writing the book? I'm always curious how that works, because as we're putting it down in our word processor, so to speak, we have to really wrestle with it in a whole new way. But again, God will put us in situations, harder situations I've found through the years, where we really have to live it out because there's something at stake, because we're putting it out there for the world. Like, this is how we live our life.
Goodness, yes. Well, he's so in the wrestle. So I'm not afraid of the wrestle, because that's where he is in the routine of things. And I think the book is filled with stories of failure or funny stories, but I'm very transparent in that. It's not about perfection. It's not about perfection in parenting or marriage, but it is about yielding completely to the Holy Spirit and allowing him access in every single area of your life. And Matt and I are very aware of that, and we live that even now. In the day to day.
Well, and sorry if there's noise around here. That's just life for right now. So you can hear little footsteps potentially in a door shutting here. So it's just real life podcasting with a bunch of people around me. I love what you described in terms of like this. God's giving you a situation where you can just live this out for people and show them that it is possible, and show them that God desperately wants to move not only through individuals but families.
Yes.
And I think God moving through a whole family, mom, dad, kids, it's a real picture of the whole church in a way that we don't often get to see. Because again, we kind of separate, and kids do this and parents do that. And the idea that we could be in partnership with God and with our kids, that's a beautiful vision. JerriAnn, in terms of people connecting with you, finding out more about the book, all the things, where do we discover you on the web?
lightbreaksthrough.org. And then I'm on Instagram, social media, all that.
Yes, all the places. And we'll make it easy like we do with every episode. We'll have links in the description and the show notes to JerriAnn's website, as well as places where you can pick up your very own copy of her new book. It's time to bring this episode of the Shaun Tabatt Show to a close. Many thanks for being a part of my conversation with JerriAnn Webb, Once again, our book today was Heaven in My Home, Building a Supernatural Family Culture. And JerriAnn, I want to say thank you so much for sharing with us today. It's been an honor and a pleasure to have you back on the show.
Thank you, Shaun.